What is up, everybody? I'm Brett L. Pape. That's Coach Bruce. And this is the Coach Approach.
Stay on.
Coach Bruce, what's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Man, just living the dream, man. Sitting here at home. I'm a little bit under the weather, so if I have a cough attack or something, I'll put myself on mute. But always super excited to jump on and do the podcast with you, man.
There you go, man. How was your holidays? I know you had some COVID concerns or COVID issues last week that made you guys have to change your Thanksgiving plans. Everyone doing okay in your part of the world?
Everyone's doing great. Yeah, we're supposed to go up to Prescott, where my mother-in-law lives, and visit her and her husband, and they both got COVID, but they're fine now. They're fully recovered now, but we ended up hosting at my house, and we have a blast when we host every year. It was just a last-minute scramble of like, holy crap. We found out, I think on Wednesday during the day, which is why we weren't able to do the show last week, and I'm like, bro, I'm scrambling right now to go to the grocery store, get everything we need. Hopefully they're not out, so we can have everybody over for Thanksgiving. But it turned out phenomenal. I mean, there's football on. You're drinking bourbon, having turkey and mashed potatoes and everything else that goes with it. So it's always good, man. How about you? How was yours?
Ours was good. It was a little different in the sense that, we're at the age now where our children, and we have a shitload of them. And so we don't know who's going to be able to show up or whatever. So we pretty much just have an open door policy with our children that dinner always is going to be at 5. That way they can go to their other parents' house, come to ours afterwards. So we ended up having 5 of them here, and it was a good time. So it's always good when you get an opportunity to spend time with your family.
Hey, let's be real, man. You've got a starting 5 for both teams, and then you've got someone coming off the bench on one of them. You got a 6th man, so you got 11 kids, bro. So don't sell it short. Just say I got a lot of kids. You got 11 kids. That's a village. Yeah, it
is.
I don't know how you do it.
They're pretty great, but so here we go. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. I know that we talked about it earlier, but have trade deadlines coming up in a lot of leagues, and it's getting down to the point of, and I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited because I'm a little burnt out, and every week that we move forward is another week to draft season and things like that, but we do have some big-time fantasy football coming up here over the next few weeks.
No, this is the fun time, and I think what's interesting about the NFL going from, a 17-week schedule to an 18-week schedule with 17 games, there's a lot of leagues that, the playoff weeks start in week 14 or week 15 because they're kind of thrown off if there's 3 rounds, and people are going, wait a minute, why are we starting in week 14? The season's going to end in week 16 when there's 2 weeks left. And so you have that conundrum as a commissioner, like, wow, do I change the rules in week 13? Because there's still bye weeks. Like, how do you have a playoff start when week 13 and 14 are bye weeks? You could have your, Aaron Rodgers in week 13 out this week, and so it's funny seeing that shuffle. So the leagues that I'm in where that happened, the commissioners were great, and they just let everybody know, hey, look, obviously I didn't realize it was starting this week. It wouldn't make any sense to start it when there's bye weeks. So if everybody's okay, let's go ahead and start it in week 15 when all the bye weeks are done. And of course, everybody agreed to it. Anybody sitting on the outside looking in and a game back, they're loving it. They're like, all right, I got another chance to make the playoffs. So this is the fun time of the year for sure. And then injuries, it's been a crazy year between COVID and injuries and suspensions, man. It's been unbelievable.
It has been. And the weird thing about it is that being in so many leagues like I am, and probably you are as well, I'm almost immune to it because any news that happens affects me negatively or positively every day. And so when something occurs to where, like I just traded for DeAndre Swift in 2 leagues, both dynasty. One league I gave up Justin Fields, a first rounder in 2024, and a third rounder in, I don't know, whatever league. But And then I ended up getting him and a couple other dudes. It doesn't matter. My point is that, we're at the nitty gritty, and then he's out. You almost become immune to injuries when you're in so many leagues because you just kind of expect it.
You know what I miss is the probable tag, right? So a player used to be doubtful, used to be questionable, and then there was probable, which means, hey, he's getting in limited practices. Odds are he's probably going to play. Questionable now is a combination of doubtful, questionable, and probable. You don't know, and some of these are until it's a Monday night football game, right? You've got a key running back that might be out, like Aaron Jones. Let's say they would have played on Monday night last week. You didn't know he was playing until the day of. Well, if it's a Monday night game, who'd you have in your lineup? Did you gamble he was going to be able to play and have him in? Did you have a backup in? I mean, it's questionable is like the worst thing in football. Coaches, they want you to have to scout for as many different lineups as you possibly can. So it's all about throwing the other team off and saying, hey, is it Lamar Jackson or is it Brett Hundley? I don't know. Figure it out. Scout them both. We're not taking this line. So it's that gamesmanship. So as a fantasy player, you want to be like, hey, what about us? What about the fantasy guys that are relying on you guys to be, open and transparent with your communication? Like, they don't care about fantasy football, right?
It's so funny. We were talking before the show, like we always do, and one of the things we talked about is how you and I were a little confused on the schedule for this week, on who was supposed to be on. So I reached out to the guest that I thought we were supposed to be on, but I just looked. We may we may not have a guest at all this week because according to the message I sent him, he's on next week, December 8th. But hopefully,
I was right.
You were right. Yeah. Holy smokes! So we'll see if we get anyone to pop in. Even if we don't, we can talk football all day, all night long, all the time. Especially from two former football coaches who spent a lot of time in the high school level. And I don't know about you, but high school football in California right now is down to the nitty gritty. Last week we have 14 divisions in the southern section, and there are sections that are our southern section that I've always coached in, and the one that I live in has over 600 schools. That's a state championship for a lot of teams or for a lot of states. But for us, they break it down to 14 divisions. So I was able to go see a local high school CF championship last week, and it was a lot of fun. And I was fortunate enough to be able to coach in those when I was younger and won a couple. But how about you guys? How's Arizona high school football going?
It's going really well. Matter of fact, Liberty, where I coach high school football out here, they won last week. They got it. So in Arizona, they do 6A, 5A, 4A. In some states do Division I, Division II. 6A is the biggest division. It's the biggest schools with the most athletes and the best programs. So we're in 6A, and 3 years ago, they started doing an open division. So they take the top 8 teams from 4A, 5A, and 6A and have a big boy tournament. So they're literally taking the top 8 teams based on strength of schedule, based on, obviously rankings and those things. And so Liberty, for the second year in a row, after winning the 6A state championship 3 years ago, they made the open for the first time last year, played against Chandler, who was a number 5 ranked team in the country, took them to overtime and went for 2 instead of 1 to try to steal a win, and we ended up not converting. So we lost. Well, this year we have Chandler on our regular season schedule, lost. Last week was the start of the playoffs. We beat Basha, who was the number 3 seed. We were the number 6 seed, and we beat them. And now we play Chandler at Chandler, which is the number, 15 ranked team in the country. And then if we win that game, we play Hamilton, who is now the number 10 ranked team in the country because they beat Chandler earlier in the year. So it's getting down to, we're playing nationally ranked teams out here in Arizona, which is a huge deal. They're playing teams from California and Florida and Georgia and we're beating those teams, in some cases. So Arizona football is on the map a lot more than it used to be.
It's pretty fun. I covered a high school football game for the first time in a long time a couple of weeks ago, and there's nothing better. You talk about the joy of the game, the pureness of what football should be out there. And yes, there's some who have aspirations to move on to the next level, but most players at the high school level are like I was, and that is that last night when you're a senior, you're never going to strap it up again. And to be able to see those kids lay it all on the line week in and week out, it's a hell of a lot of fun. And I miss it I miss the Friday nights of being a high school football coach. The other stuff I don't miss so much. But everything that goes along to a Friday night in high school football, not too many things that are better.
Man, I miss it all. I miss the film. I miss scouting teams for the following week or 2 weeks out. I miss getting with the players in film room and watching the upcoming week's opponent and asking them to grade the defensive backs as a receiver coach. Like, hey, what do you see? Is it a zone turn? Is it a man turn? Where are the safeties at? Where are your apex players at? What do you see? What routes do you like? And getting them to think like a coach and having that translate to Friday night football. I miss all that. I miss the kids first and foremost, but I miss the lights and I miss AC/DC blaring when the Lions come out.
Yes.
I miss all that stuff, man. It's such a great sport, and those kids play for the love of the game. It's not about money. Yes, they're trying to get a D1 scholarship, but at that level, if you got 100 kids on your team, 98 of them probably aren't going to play college football.
Correct.
So they're playing for the passion and the love of the game, and there's something very, very cool about that.
It really is. It really is. Speaking of which, and I know you, so we both have been at the high school level. We both had kids that have been recruited at a high level. This last week in the college football with the coaching changes, for me, having a Lincoln Riley go to USC is huge for Southern California high school football and football in general, because now kids hopefully are going to want to stay home. For too long, I've seen local athletes go across the country because the guys like whoever, Clay Helton or whatever, just didn't really excite them enough to stay home. So I know Southern California is pretty excited about the changes that have happened over the last week.
Well, it's a game changer. You talk about hitting a home run, and people have talked about USC, whether it was college football game day or Mark Sanchez, and all these other guys, Kirk Herbstreit, and those guys that talk about it's such a neat thing to see a guy like Lincoln Riley. You go, is he ever going to win it in Oklahoma? The defense have never been up to speed to play against an SEC team and really compete for a national title, but they've come close. They have a great regular season. If they get in the college football playoff, they tend to get beat up pretty good. So now you have him go to USC, where now everybody wants to go to LA. It's the mecca, the media mecca. That New York. New York's not exactly a football deal. It's more of a basketball place. But you have, I think it's great for the game, and I think it's great for USC. As an ASU fan, I'm like, crap, here we go. USC's gonna be great for the next 10 years. What he's gonna be able to do to recruit. There's already rumors about Caleb Williams going to follow him. OU players enter the transfer portal. He's going to take 5 or 6 top guys from Oklahoma. He's going to be able to recruit, all the kids there in the state. And I think what's interesting is people get frustrated about, I can't believe these coaches are leaving with no notice. And it's like, hey, don't blame the coaches. Blame the NCAA for the early recruiting period. Because if you don't make that choice to hire your coach and say, hey, we need you here yesterday, there's 7 or 8 kids you might lose based on the current coaching staff versus who you're bringing in. What up-and-coming quarterback doesn't want to go play for a Lincoln Riley at USC, what kind of talent they can recruit, and how he develops quarterbacks? Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts, and Baker Mayfield. And, he's a quarterback whisperer. He develops quarterbacks. He runs a great offense. You guys put up numbers, and they're in the Heisman race. Like, how do you not, if you play quarterback or you play a skill position, or how do you not want to go play at USC? You absolutely want to play.
Already, and I'm not. I am not a Devy guy. I'm in a Devy league, but I don't follow this stuff. I follow people who do. And when I say that, Malachi Nelson from Southern California, he is going to be. He was literally committed to Oklahoma last weekend. As soon as the change was made, now he's staying home and going to USC. So we already see the ramifications of this move for USC.
Yeah, because again, it's if you play the quarterback position, why are you going to that school? Because Lincoln Riley develops quarterbacks. They compete for the Heisman, get drafted number 1 overall, and have NFL careers. So you're going to chase that. Why wouldn't you?
No, I agree. It's just to be, and it's weird is because my presence on Twitter, anything I tweet is literally with no background information other than tea leaves or whatever. And so throughout the whole season this year, after USC made a coaching change, I'd heard from a lot of high school coaches that I talked to on a regular basis that there was talk that with the struggles in Seattle, Pete Carroll was going to come home to kind of right the ship and so forth. And so I tweeted a lot that Pete Carroll is not out of the question of returning back to USC. But being a USC fan, I'd much rather have Lincoln Riley. I'd much rather have a 38-year-old coach who's already done what he's done and has the ability to go into someone's home and bring a player like a Spencer Rattler, or bring a player like a Malachi Nelson we just talked about, and get him into the program. So I know me and many other Southern California fans are pretty excited about the hire.
Yeah, and same thing for Brian Kelly going to LSU. Again, decided to move on for Ed Orgeron. Thank you for the national championship. This team is going in the right direction. We feel like we can do better. We want to compete, for the national championship year in and year out. They go out and get a guy like Brian Kelly. There's nothing more Brian Kelly has to prove at Notre Dame. He's taken Notre Dame as far as he can. At the end of the day, you're limited on who you can recruit. You're having to recruit people to go to Indiana in the cold. As much as I love Notre Dame and I love the gold helmets and I love the tradition, like guys that don't make grades or guys that, aren't academically there or don't want to go play in the cold aren't going to go to Notre Dame. He's taking Notre Dame as far as he's going to take him. So now he's going to go to LSU. Now he's going to say, I can play the Georgias and the Alabamas with similar players that I can recruit that didn't qualify to play at Notre Dame. So I love the move for Brian Kelly. And what sucks is, what happens later in the evening, he's got to send a text to all of his players because the story gets out. And that's the downside. And I think, look, we coached at a high level in high school, which, look, that's not D1. It's not college football. It's not the NFL. It's not that big of a deal. But at the same time, like as a coach, you can kind of be like, that's the hardest part when I left football was not coaching anymore. It was the kids. Trust me, those coaches have built relationships with those kids, and it's difficult for them to make that decision. But when they're offering you 2 houses in LA, a private jet for your family to travel, $250 million, whatever it is, and I'm throwing the number out there as a random number, but, you have a chance to go coach at one of the best universities in all of college football and build and continue to build on a legacy that others have created before you. How do you as a coach turn that down? 9 out of 10 coaches, and I only say 9 out of 10 because I just won't say 10 out of 10, but would take that same job. They would do it the same exact way. It sucks for the players, but that's the reality with the early recruiting period in the NCAA. You have to get that coach now. You can't wait for the season to play out and then bring him. You've already missed out on 7 or 8 recruits you probably would have gotten had you had that coach sooner. You just don't have a choice.
Now, and you're in Los Angeles. You're not in Oklahoma. And nothing against Oklahoma. I mean, I am moving and retiring in a Midwestern state because I want the slower paced lifestyle. But to have the opportunity that he's getting there, you can't fault him. And it's unfortunate because Brian Kelly, it's weird because Lincoln Riley is not being beat up in the media. Brian Kelly is being beat up in the media. And Brian Kelly having to work with the constrictions that he had at Notre Dame for so long, I mean, I can't fault that guy either. And he joked, it was a joke last week, and he said, hey, I'm not interested in anything. But if someone gives me a $250 million offer, I got to talk to my wife because she's going to be pissed if I don't even at least think about it. Well, he didn't get $250 million. He still got a hell of a lot of money, and he also got the opportunity to bring in any kid theoretically that he wants that is nowhere near being a qualifier. So I have the system is made the way it is, and the system is as it is. So I can't fault these guys for chasing the money, or more importantly, chasing an opportunity to get the big ring.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing I learned a long time ago is it's not my job to discuss how another man should make his money. As long as it's honest, it's legal, and it's ethical. If he wants to take a better job, puts a better situation for his family at a better university, they can recruit better players. How do you fault the guy for making that move, for making his life better for him and his family?
Yeah, I mean, and I would never. It's very similar to. I think the older you get in life, the less judgmental you get. And for me, I just like, hey man, I can do what you got to do, whatever's best for you. But let's move on to some pretty big NFL news. And NFL news is just kind of, let's talk about what happened last week. Dallas, your team is struggling. And whether it be last year, they struggled with an immense amount of injuries with Dak and virtually the entire offensive line. This year, we're looking at two strong pieces on the defensive side, and then CeeDee Lamb coming up with a concussion, and then Cooper coming up with COVID and everything else he's been dealing with. So they've lost a few games last week, and then they lost last week 36-33 to Las Vegas. As a true diehard Cowboys fan, how worried are you about them and with these recent lack of success?
Well, I'll say this. I was concerned with the way the Eagles were playing up until this last weekend. I thought Jalen Hurts was progressing. I was very outspoken in the offseason. I had him just outside the top 10 in dynasty rankings, and people thought I was crazy because of, the rushing ability. And they were right. He's outperformed expectations, but having only played 6 or 7 games last year, whatever it was, I wasn't ready to crack with a new guy coming in, an offensive coordinator. Wanted to see what that offense looked like. I'm going to err on the side of caution, but the Eagles losing a game against the Giants and not playing well, and Hurts really struggling in that game. What Washington is now doing, now that Antonio Gibson's finally getting the volume I think he should have been getting all year. Well, I'm more concerned about Washington than I am Philadelphia right now. But I think Dallas is very lucky to be in the NFC least, right? You're 7-4. You have a very easy schedule the rest of the way, but you have to play Washington twice. You got to play Philadelphia again. Those divisional games can be tough, but I don't make any excuses. I mean, the reality is, yeah, you can say, hey, we didn't have Randy Gregory. We didn't have DeMarcus Lawrence. Now we're losing Tristan Hill for a game because of a stupid suspension. Amari Cooper, was out for 2 games due to COVID. CeeDee Lamb got a concussion, wasn't there in the second half. You can say all that stuff, but look, there's other teams battling the same thing.
Right.
And I think the reality is, I will say this from an offensive perspective, having been an offensive coordinator, there's all in the NFL, and I think if you're a casual fan, you see a receiver run a route and the quarterback, sails the ball. Sometimes that's based on the DB's leverage. He's expecting that receiver to run a comeback route, not a curl route. So the ball gets thrown to the outside and receiver, but it looks like a bad throw by the quarterback. I think that's the one thing when you have a guy like Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb both out, and you've got Cedric Wilson and you've got Noah Brown and Malik Turner. Those are not guys that are seeing the type of volume and that have that timing down. They're not running with the ones for, all the reps in practice. And so there is something to be said for the volume. What I was surprised by is that Dallas was a team that was running for 200 yards a game, 180 yards a game when they were winning 6 in a row. And
Right.
They haven't been able to run the football. They had not been able to run the football. And, Zeke's got the knee injury. I get it. But that team with Tyron Smith back, Zach Martin back, Lyle Collins would start this week with Steele out. That team should be able to run the football a lot better than it is. And so I'm a little surprised we're not seeing more run volume than we're seeing.
Well, let's just hope it's a hiccup and things get back to normal pretty quick as far as you being a Dallas fan. I'll tell you what, I am becoming a bigger and bigger fan of Mac Jones every week of this NFL season. I drafted him a lot in my SF league, rookie leagues, drafts last year. I got him in the second round, and that guy just, more important, just as a fan of football, he's pretty damn good. And Bill Belichick has got a good thing going there. And then they just upset a Tennessee team. I realized Henry, and they didn't have A.J. Brown, and they don't have a Julio Jones. But they still have a rookie quarterback playing football there, and they just put together a pretty good win. And here they are leading the AFC East. Not a lot of people projecting them to lead at this point in the season.
It's interesting. I was listening to Colin Cowherd, and I heard it somewhere else too, but there's also the books about the Patriots. I'm a big book reader when it comes to leadership, especially in sports, and whether it was Lou Holtz or Vince Lombardi books and stuff about the Patriots have 3 books: Patriot Reign, The Patriot Way, and I can't remember the name of the third. But there's a book where Bill Belichick actually talks about what he looks for in certain players: the height, the weight, the length of the arms, the size of the hands, and what type of players he looks for. And when you get to the quarterback portion, he talks about, I don't need a guy. It's not about athleticism. Everybody right now is chasing that quarterback that can move the pocket, that can run. And hey, there's a huge part, especially for fantasy football. We love it. But he's looking for the guys that have an extremely high football IQ, that he can draw a play on the funny, I was going to say dry erase board. Nowadays, we've got so much better technology. But you can draw a play, erase it, and that kid can get up and draw the exact same play and almost say verbatim what you just said. And the intangibles he looked for in Tom Brady are very similar to what he looked for in Mac Jones. They're very, very similar in that regard. He has a specific type of quarterback he's looking for. This book was written in the early 90s. This is not something that was written 3 years ago. This is something that was written recently. So he knows what he's looking for. And so was he lucky that Mac Jones fell to 15? Absolutely. But at the same time, here we are. They get guys back from opted out on the defensive side of the ball. They can flip field position. They're one of the top defenses in the NFL. They're good on special teams. They don't make mistakes. It's another quarterback, high football IQ, doesn't turn the ball over, can make all the throws you need him to make. It's like, you don't want to rush say Tom Brady 2.0. Like, look, that's way too much.
Sure.
There are some similarities in terms of rookie year, although one was a first-round draft pick, one was a sixth-round draft pick. But when you look at intangibles and the reasons why they drafted Tom Brady, what he did his last 2 years at Michigan, there's some similarities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the similarities mostly are just being able to manage the game and being able to be comfortable in wherever and whatever situation comes his way. We're going to move on real quick because we got our guest coming in a second. And I'd like to touch upon a couple games for this week coming up. But I got a delivery. Someone's at my door. I'm going to walk away. But why don't you kind of talk about the impressive win by Green Bay traveling and beating the Rams last week, 36-28. Be right back.
Hey, you got it. Yeah, hey, that was a phenomenal game. I mean, you look at what that game meant coming into it and how that game played out. The Packers are a team that, look, Aaron Rodgers right now has got to be, for me, we talk about Tom Brady, and they got a big win in Indianapolis against the Colts, 38-31. Regular season, Lenny decided to show up. But I think what Aaron Rodgers is doing with the toe, with all the things that happened in the offseason, being a good Rams team, went out and got Von Miller, and went out and got Odell Beckham, and granted they lost, Robert Woods, but I think what they are doing in Green Bay, that's my favorite in the NFC, and this is a team that can go to the Super Bowl. This is a team that is playing at the highest level. I think Aaron Rodgers moved himself into the front runner and the MVP conversation right now. I know it's tough. There's a lot of Tom Brady fans out there, but I just think what he is doing in Green Bay is absolutely outstanding. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Another game that Brett and I talked about before we came on was, hey, what's going on, with the Buccaneers-Colts game? You have the Colts that came in and are running the football extremely well. Jonathan Taylor's playing extremely well. Yes, he was held to less than 100 yards. I think it was the first game in 9 games. He didn't have 100 yards rushing. I think that the Colts are peaking at the right time. But what a big win for Tampa Bay, with the Buccaneers. That was a great game. You saw the Patriots show up and shellac the Titans. The Titans are out. Have lost a lot of players, but I think that what the Patriots are doing in New England is absolutely outstanding. We just talked about Mac Jones. We talked about Ramondre Stevenson, and Damon Harris is now back and healthy. They've got Brandon Bolden coming out of the backfield to play that James White role. You've got the defensive players back from last season. That defense is as good as any defense in the NFL right now. So there's a lot of things that still have to shake out, I think, for the rest of the season. And, one thing that we talked about too is Christian McCaffrey. Here he is now out for the season. Panthers are going to try to make a late run. Ran into a tough Miami team that's also peaking at the right time. So, here you go. They didn't show up. Miami did. Tua Tagovailoa is playing extremely well right now.
He is. I mean, that dude, nobody's gotten beaten up more by that guy, but he has played really well over the last few weeks. And you bring up Christian McCaffrey. Holy smokes. What are you doing as a Christian McCaffrey owner and dynasty? Are you got to be worried about this constant injury issue?
So I've only got him on a few teams because everybody has him as a 1.01, right? So I'm always concerned with guy coming off an injury. What is the offense going to look like this year with Sam Darnold coming in? The talent is obvious, but I wasn't willing to take him at 1.01. If I can get him at 1.05, then I feel like there's something there. There weren't a whole lot of drafts. He was available. So Scott Fishbowl, I got him at 1.06. And I don't normally handcuff my own running backs. But with Christian McCaffrey coming off an injury, I went out. I liked Chuba Hubbard coming out of Oklahoma State. I felt like he had the speed and the ability in that offense. We look at what Mike Davis did last year. And you look at what Mike Davis did in Atlanta this year. Mike Davis is not a great football player. Chuba Hubbard's an upgrade. I felt like, hey, if the opportunity presents itself and seems he misses games, you got to grab Chuba Hubbard. So I was big on making sure I got him. And so that's played out well. And unfortunately, they have a bye this week, so I don't get either one of them.
Well, I mean, I can't really complain too much about the Scott Fishbowl because I'm 8-4. But I digress. Let's move on. Why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest this week? Because I don't know about you, but I'm pretty damn excited about who we got on.
Yeah, hey, we're super excited to have Josh Larky on. He is absolutely phenomenal. I've been following Josh for a long time, and I follow his TikToks now. He's all over social media. He's not afraid to take the shirt off and talk about fantasy football. You got to love that. He's over at Roto Underworld, does a lot of things with coding. He's absolutely outstanding. One of my favorite follows in the space. Josh, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, you guys. I'm excited to be here. Talk some football with the two of you. And also, I'll note the Redlands connection that we have. I think you're the only other Redlands alumni that I found so far on Twitter in this fantasy football space. So we got to rep our small 2,000 person college.
Well, it's a Bulldogs, right? You got to love the Bulldogs.
Yeah, we went with the most generic mascot possible. So
I went to Fresno State, and I'm a Bulldog as well. So all three of us.
There we go.
You can't be mad. Hey, Josh, before we get started, I owe you a big apology, and that is that you weren't on the schedule until next week. So if you noticed that today and said, "Oh shit, I guess I'm on this week," and you cleared your calendar, I truly appreciate it, because Coach Bruce told me today, is like, I don't think that was who was supposed to be on. I'm like, oh shit, I hope he shows up. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I saw that too. I was like, oh wow, because when I got the show sheet, I thought, wow, this is the most on top of it podcast I've ever been a part of. I'm getting the show sheet 8 days in advance, and then it was like, oh, you're coming on tonight, right? And I was free, so I thought, let's talk some football. Luckily, I work from home. My schedule is pretty flexible, and I was like, of course, I'll just bump this up. I've got nothing going on. So
we thought we'd just throw you a curveball, man, and just be like, hey, look, we're going to see you 8 days early, but then we're going to see how well you do on the fly. We're going to be like, hey, an hour before the show, by the way, Josh Larky is going to be
you're on. Hey, so let's just jump into it. And Coach Bruce and I always talk about how we're not analysts. We're not you. We're not anybody we bring on here. And with that being said, what we are is consumers of information that people like you put out there. And Player Profiler is one of the best. And I'd like you to kind of share how you got to the point that where you're at now, that where you're pretty much running the show as far as analytics go on that site. So how did that come about?
So it's a funny story. So I went to college, University of Redlands. I studied econ. And I always really loved sports throughout my entire life, playing sports. I loved collecting baseball cards as a kid. I just like sports numbers. And it was junior year of college. I did a project where I looked at Major League Baseball and the economy and the big 2007 to 2009 recession. Did a little bit of really, really basic stats analysis for it, and I was just hooked. And the 10-page paper for that class turned into a 50-page honors thesis. And I just couldn't get enough of writing about something involving sports in a data-driven way. And when I was trying to look at these quote-unquote sports analytics jobs, I realized that I didn't really know how to code, and that was actually really important to really break into the industry in kind of a, like, it's been done before. This is a real path to do it kind of way, because the way that I thought I was going to be able to do it, where I was like, oh, hey, I can just stare at some Excel numbers. You should hire me. I was going to be getting out-competed by someone who had been coding for 3, 4, 5 years. So I went to UT Austin. I got a master's there in business analytics after college. And it was a couple months before graduation. I went to a sports analytics conference. And it was basically just to network, hear some panelists, meet some people. And I'm chronically late to everything. I showed up late to the football analytics panel. I had to sit in the back of the room. And I'm this sweaty grad school student in my really nice outfit, which I didn't like wearing. And the guy next to me, he is in just the most casual clothes. He's on his computer. He looks like he's doing something important. I sit down next to him. It ends up being Matt Kelly, who runs Player Profiler and who started it 8 years ago.
Okay.
And on the football analytics panel was Teddy Bruschi and some stats people. And Bruschi said something that was just like, it was out of left field for an analytics conference. And Matt and I hadn't really talked much. And Matt just turns to me in the back of the room quietly and he goes, Teddy Bruschi is a real dumbass, isn't he? And it just like, it took me by surprise. I chuckled. We started up a conversation and he found out that I was in grad school, wanted to make a little money. I started doing some coding work for him in the site. And this was back in the beginning of 2018. And I had 2 different jobs in the baseball industry before this, but always stayed in contact with Matt, was always doing work for him. And then when I was actually COVID furloughed from a business analytics role with the Padres baseball team, turns out if you're doing attendance projections and you project no attendance due to COVID for the 2020 season, you get fired because there's no use for you. So So I reached out to Matt and was like, hey, I have a lot more free time. I can do even more work. And then just slowly kind of the 2 of us sort of built a full-time role where I've taken over pretty much all of the stats operations for the site and a lot of the back-end stats and generating those. So it's been a ton of fun. So that's kind of the ultimate long-winded, but also like concise version of how I'm ultimately the director of analytics for a fantasy football website.
Yeah, that site is outstanding. I think it's one of the first sites I use is Player Profiler, and what you guys do in putting that site together is phenomenal. Especially you start getting into rookie grading and you start getting into the scores, the combine, and all the other tools you have on that site. But how long have you been into fantasy football, like as a player?
So that's actually a great question. Very, very short. I started playing fantasy football in grad school. Okay. I've been a football fan my whole life, and I just was always afraid that fantasy would make me enjoy the game less. So I said, I'm not going to play fantasy football because I love rooting for players I like. I like rooting for my San Diego Chargers. Why would I ever want to jeopardize that enjoyment with fantasy football? So I was always hyper aware of all the numbers. I did my own football research totally for fun, nothing fantasy related. And then started playing in grad school and just kind of snowballed from there. I actually think my lack of fantasy football experience kind of helps differentiate my work. So there's the obvious drawbacks, which is that I have less playing experience if I've only been doing it for like 4.5 years. Sure. But I think one of the pros is that I came in with just sort of this blank slate, open mind, and that I've kind of been shaped in large part by my own research and by the work done before me from other people at sites like Player Profiler. So it's been kind of cool to come from this baseball analytics background where baseball is so incredibly advanced with analytics to football where it's just the Wild West in that, I mean, you still have coaches where it's 4th and 1 and they're 30 yards from scoring and they go for the 50-yard field goal or they even punt sometimes. Yeah. So like football is just, you would never see this type of stuff in baseball. Like this type of just clearly the wrong decision being made analytically. So I think that's one of the fun parts about football. And it's such an interesting challenge because in baseball, like nothing I was doing was all that innovative. It's like, oh, you're just working for the team. You're doing what every other team does. But with football, almost every project that I do is new and unique in some fashion. And I think that that's really exciting and that it kind of helps that I don't have this incredibly rigorous background of 10 to 20 years playing where I'm very set and this is how I'm supposed to play. So it's been kind of interesting on the fly developing strategies in that sense.
I like that because you're very similar to the people you're reaching. You know what I mean? I mean, because most people that are going to Player Profile aren't on Twitter. Most people are just going there to get a quick look and try and get ready for a draft or whatever it may be. And I bring that up only in the sense that because you're kind of, you're going off of what works for you, it seems to, kind of make more sense for us who haven't been doing it very long either. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you is that when you talk about developing new strategies this summer, holy smokes, Josh, being a Twitter guy who's on there all day long, the number of conversations regarding your pieces about stacking and best ball and so forth, it got pretty heated. And tell us about why you think stacking a quarterback with somebody else in best ball and all that whole research you did Why is that the best way to go?
So just if someone hears the word stack and is like, what is a stack? Stacking is essentially you want your quarterback and one of your receivers, tight ends to be on the same team. So for example, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, if they are both on your fantasy roster, that's a stack because they're both on the Buffalo Bills. And what from my research, and actually we'll just start theoretically. So I think theoretically why stacking makes sense is that it's a really good way to limit how many different things you need to get correct in your analysis because you're chasing correlated outcomes season long and week to week. And the idea behind that is that yes, you may be able in your fantasy draft to say in round 5 I want this guy, in round 6 I want this guy, in round 7 I want this guy. And that's fine. We're going to have some hits, we're going to have some misses, but we're actually better in many ways at projecting which offense we think will be good. So at the start of this season, I mean, it's not breaking news or anything, but I think we all kind of thought the Buccaneers, the Bills, that these would be really good offenses and that there would likely be multiple fantasy relevant players from that offense. So one thing in best ball where you don't set a roster each week and whatever team you drafted, the highest scoring players at each position each week give you points is I would love taking Josh Allen in the 4th round and then in rounds 10 and 11 back to back taking Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders, with the idea being, I don't know which guy's going to get the yards each week, but I think the Bills are going to be a good offense. There's probably going to be some 20 fantasy point weeks from both of these guys. Why not take both? I already have Josh Allen. And that way, Josh Allen has a big game. One or both of Beasley and Sanders probably have a decent game. One of them probably caught a long touchdown as well. Now I have at least 2 players in my lineup. And the way to think about it, another way would be, let's say that I take Keenan Allen in the 3rd round of a draft. The 7th round comes along, and I know that a lot of people will say, oh, I took Keenan Allen. I don't want to take Justin Herbert in the 7th round. That's too much risk with the Chargers. I already have Allen. Why would I take Herbert? And that their idea is that they're minimizing risk by taking only one Charger, which, yes, you're minimizing risk. But if you think about every fantasy football league, the payouts are top heavy. The glory of winning is via winning. If you get 4th place out of 12 teams, you're not getting high fives. No one's like, oh, you had a really strong fantasy season getting 4th place out of 12. You want to get 1st or 2nd place. That's where the money is. That's where the glory is. And you just feel better about your team when you're in 1st or 2nd.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not really a minimizing risk equation. You should be thinking about it as, if I have a good team, I want to hit a home run. And that if you take Keenan Allen in the 3rd round, how does Keenan Allen exceed ADP? He has a really good season. He has a lot of yards. He has a lot of touchdowns, which doesn't that inherently mean then that Justin Herbert also has a good season?
Sure,
so therefore, if you take Allen, why not take Herbert in round 7 and have extra risk, but also extra reward? Because we're not chasing these 50-50 outcomes. You're not playing for 4th, 5th, 6th place. You're playing for 1st or 2nd place. Therefore, take on that extra risk. Take the correlated outcome where if one guy does well, it's a good chance the other guy also does well. So I think that's a kind of a good way to think about it is like, yes, Allen Robinson has been a total fantasy bust, but if you took him in round 3 instead of Keenan Allen and then took Herbert round 7, think about how there's no correlation between Allen Robinson and Herbert. Allen Robinson has been a total bust. Justin Herbert has not. Okay, let's say you had Allen Robinson, Justin Herbert. Are you high-fiving yourself that you didn't also take Fields or Dalton and double down on the Bears? Or are you like, oh, it doesn't matter. My team's screwed. My 3rd-round pick has done nothing all season.
Sure.
That's why you might as well take on that risk, because if you go and minimize risk and you only have 1 bust instead of 2 busts, it doesn't matter. Your season's probably not looking so hot either way. So that's why you really want to chase less than the 50-50 outcome in that. If all the money's tied up in the top 2 spots of your league and there's 12 teams, you want to chase like a top 15% outcome and be one of those top 2 teams then, rather than saying, I want to just minimize risk And
Yeah.
that's why stacking is so important.
Well, let me
I'm huge on stacking.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm big on it too, and I think what's interesting about stacking too is not trying to be so pivotal and trying to stack. Like I'm trying to get Dak Prescott and I'm trying to get CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper. If I can't get him, I'm okay with Michael Gallup as a wide receiver 3 in an offense that should move the ball. So I'm big on it. Plus, I get that gratification of late in the game. I'm down 7. Dak throws a touchdown to Michael Gallup. I'm getting 10 to 12 points in one swing, plus the yardage, plus the reception.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the other thing is the math behind it. That
Yeah, it's big.
if you have Justin Herbert and Stephon Diggs,
Yeah,
Stephon Diggs catches a touchdown pass. We have no idea if Herbert threw a touchdown pass for 4 points.
bingo.
But if you have Keenan Allen, Herbert gets a 4-point touchdown. Allen gets a 6-point touchdown, 10 fantasy points for TDs plus the yards. And that the
Yes.
math, it's just overwhelmingly in that direction, like you said.
Love it.
Yeah, I do too. And the funny thing is that what I like about Coach and I is that we don't claim to know anything. And so, with that being said, with Player Profiler, I joined all of that stuff last year. And one of the questions I have is, if I'm looking at, like, let's just say a Kenny, what profile number do you think is most important for me to look at? Is it the 40-yard dash? Is it the speed score? Is it the burst score? What am I looking at when I go to your site and I see all these numbers? What should I really be looking for when I see it?
So I think it just kind of depends on the player. I would love to say, like, here's a magic number.
In
If
position,
you look at
right?
this predicts fantasy success, you're golden. If we had that magic number, then I would win 100% of my leagues.
Sure.
I would be rolling in millions of dollars of cash if it was that simple. I would just enter all high stakes leagues and take them down because I was like, I knew this number.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not that simple. However, I think that there are different things that we can point to that can help out with the profile. So one of them, for instance, is that we know that with running backs, aside from draft capital, and that if you're drafted in the first or second round of the NFL draft, you have a longer leash. You're probably going to get more carries. In addition to that, you want big, fast running backs. And that's really important for the guys that are staying out on the field and having long NFL careers. And we kind of saw that materialize this year with the 49ers. And that you could actually just kind of directly compare Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah.
And if you just think football-wise about the scheme that San Francisco runs, it's a zone running scheme. We know that they want really fast running backs. And you can say, okay, historically, it looks like they've prioritized really fast guys. Think Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman. These guys are burners. Their vision is just, it doesn't even matter what their vision is. They're just told to be a one-cut runner.
Yeah.
And you're going this way. Okay. Elijah Mitchell runs a 4.3 at his pro day. Trey Sermon runs a 4.6 at his pro day. Player profile, you can look, and that can just be one number where already you know a little bit about football. You know the Niners really like smaller, faster running backs for that team specifically. And your red alert goes off and you go, wow, what? Okay, I know they traded up for Trey Sermon, but also he looks nothing like every other successful running back there. And you look at Elijah Mitchell's profile, and the first thing you see is, holy crap, this guy ran a 4.3 at his pro day. So that's an example, I guess, where you could use one metric. But the way that I generally like to use it is I like being able to tell a story, and that you can look at several metrics when you scroll down to their metrics section and really get a good sense of what this player's doing. Or if you flip from the metrics to the game log section in that area of the profile, you can get a really good idea of how a player's doing. So I have David Montgomery pulled up because I was doing some research on him earlier. If I scroll down on his player profiler page, and let's just say that I'm looking at Montgomery and I go, what, is he a bell cow? Is he? I know he's not the most explosive runner. He's not the sexiest player in fantasy football. He had the good stretch last year, but Khalil Herbert was really good, right?
Right.
Is Montgomery doing well? And you can look at his metrics section and go, wow, he has a 77.5% snap share this year. Number 2 among running backs. Wow. He has 13.1 weighted opportunities per game. And then you can start looking at other running backs and go, wow, weighted opportunities is basically just trying to translate carries and targets into fantasy points. And you go, wow, that's actually, whoa, that's kind of good. He has 21 red zone touches, 3 per game. I want a running back who's getting 3 red zone touches a game. And that's what you can kind of do is look at these stats. And for example, if I looked and it's like David Montgomery has a 46% snap share. All right, he's not a bell cow. Maybe Khalil Herbert's bleeding into his work. So that's kind of how I like to look at it. Is I'll try and look at 3, 4, 5 metrics, and that usually you can tell a pretty good story from any 4 or 5. And that if my story was trying to be Montgomery sucks, he's not a bell cow, we don't want him in fantasy, it'd be really hard to justify that if I see that he has the number 2 snap share per game and a 77.1% running back team opportunity share, number 5 in the NFL per game. Wow, Montgomery's a workhorse. It's not the best offense, but we know at least in this offense, Montgomery is getting pretty much every touch.
Man, you bring up so many great points, man. That was so good. There's so many ways to go with it because we can talk about Elijah Mitchell versus Trey Sermon, draft capital versus metrics that fit the system. And that's kind of what coach approach is about. When Brett and I talk, it's like bringing real football to fantasy football, right? Like you can look at draft capital. You can also look at the metrics and the player and the system he came from and say, who is a better scheme fit? But the reality was you could get Elijah Mitchell at much better value based on ADP, and he's a better athlete that's a little bit quicker. So if you're ahead of the curve on that, hopefully you already knew Elijah Mitchell was a better fit, and you went that route, waited while everybody else was drafting Trey Sermon a little bit earlier. But I want to ask you, and this is kind of going off the cusp because you brought up such a great point. There's a big debate on Twitter right now. I don't know if you've seen it or not. I'm a big Cowboys guy. I get it. But Tony Pollard versus Zeke Elliott, I think is a prime example of real football versus fantasy football. And you look at Tony Pollard and limited number of touches and say, well, he's averaging 5.3 yards per carry, but he's only got 100 touches. You look at Zeke and he's got almost double the touches and he's at 4.5 yards per carry. But he's getting all the short yardage in the goal line situation. It's a 1-yard run for a touchdown. Of course, his average per carry is going to be lower, right? So I think it's interesting to look at what he does in pass pro, what he does in the passing game from a blocking perspective. And so you have to look at the entire picture and go, I love Tony Pollard. The guy's got an immense talent. He's a great change of pace. He's the NFL's version of Thunder and Lightning right now, like you have a Tiki Barber and Ron Dane with the Giants back in the day. I think you get a little bit of that with the Cowboys. You know, Zeke's going to be smash mouth. He's going to drop a helmet. He's going to carry you for 3, whereas Pollard's going to be the guy that's going to get to the outside, take one cut, and be going for 60. Where are you at with that? Because I think that's such a great debate on Twitter because it's volume versus metrics. Well, Pollard's a better athlete. He's quicker. He's faster. But Zeke Elliott's the guy that gets the volume, right? Zeke's going to have another year of 50-plus receptions, and he's getting the goal line carry, which translates to touchdown.
Yeah,
so
on this
debate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on this debate, I lean Zeke. I think
me too.
This is clearly the running back that Dallas prefers. He has the draft capital. He has the contract. He has years of sustained production and also the ability to hold up under immense volume season after season. And yes, Tony Pollard has been so efficient, but like you said, it's a lot easier to be efficient on fewer touches. And that one thing that you see with almost every running back is the more touches they get, the less efficient they get. Yeah. One of my favorites is Justin Jackson. I think he averaged 7 yards per carry a couple seasons ago. And a lot of people were like, oh my goodness.
You got to get him the ball more, right?
What a sleeper. He's averaging 7 yards a carry. He should touch the ball on every play if he's getting 7 yards a carry. And what do you know, since that like 30 carry or whatever it was season 2 years ago when he had 7 yards a carry, he's averaged significantly fewer yards per carry since then. And that we always want to get rid of these small sample sizes. And that, sure, per touch, Pollard way more efficient, but it's also a much smaller sample size. And it's also much easier if you're only asked to touch the ball a few times a game. If we flip the role and say, hey, Pollard, we want you to have the Zeke pass blocking workload, run as many routes as Zeke, because I think most people don't realize Ezekiel Elliott is a total usage monster. Week 12, no running back ran more routes than Ezekiel Elliott. Like, I know people are like, oh, Pollard, he was a receiver in college. This is the guy that gets all the targets. Well, Zeke had a ton of targets this past week too. He ran 32 routes, which is more than many receivers run in any game. And that if we flip it and go, all right, Pollard, you're going to run 32 routes. You're going to pass block on every down. You're going to get those tough carries up the middle. I like to think Pollard would be significantly less efficient than he is now, and that if you gave
100%.
Zeke a change of pace role, Zeke would be so efficient. I think that's what some people don't realize is that, yes, when you just do these one-for-one comparisons and it's a small sample to a large sample, large workload, small workload, it can often be kind of a trap. And it's just like with some of these like field stretcher receivers. I think that's another one I see it with.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Have you seen his yards per target? This guy's an animal. He's averaging 12 yards per target. You should just target him on every single play. And it's like, well, the reason he's averaging 12 yards per target is he's actually god awful at getting open.
Yeah.
He just happens to be fast. So the only time he's targeted, it's like, yeah, no shit. He's open 30 yards down the field and they chucked a bomb to him. Of course, per target, he's going to be efficient. The reason that he's not getting more routes and why he's not getting more targets is, sorry, he just wasn't open other than those 2 plays per game. So I think some of these small sample things it's definitely an advantage that I think we have when we can spot them and go, okay, I'm not going to put all my eggs in a basket. Pollard might be one of the highest upside backup running backs in the entire NFL.
Yeah.
But any given week, Ezekiel Elliott will probably score more fantasy points.
I mean, all of it's a guessing game. And we go to people like you so we don't have to guess as much. And I bring that up because a guy that I was really high on I have a lot of teams that have him on my team. And one of your podcasts, I think it might have been one of your first ones this season, was on Laviska Shenault. And I listened to it because it was yours. But the first thing that I noticed and listened to it is you tell a hell of a story. You're very, I was sucked in right from the start. The second reason why I listened to it is because he's someone I was high on a long time. And you bring up all the factors on why you thought he was going to be great. What are you doing now when it hasn't quite been there? Do you blame it on, the fact that Trevor Lawrence is a rookie? How do you evaluate your process when a Laviska isn't doing exactly what Laviska should have been or what many people thought he would do?
So with Shenault, part of why I was really high on him was we just don't see a lot of players like him. And with how physically talented he is, I knew that this is the type of player that can have this just ridiculous ceiling. If we think back to like a Demaryius Thomas, I made that comparison a few times where I said, Demaryius Thomas was never the best route runner. He was just bigger than everyone that covered him.
Yeah.
He was a monster after the catch, and he was really fast. And if you get the ball in this guy's hands and then he learns receiver on the fly at a higher level in the NFL, he can be an elite fantasy asset without needing that polish. Same with DK Metcalf. No one would say that DK Metcalf is the most polished receiver out there.
In fact, they said everything different prior to the draft.
Correct.
And with
I was a big Laviska guy too, and I still think there's an opportunity for him. I still feel like he's not being used properly. I think he's a guy that can take direct snaps and wildcat. I think he's a guy who can run screen game. He's a guy that can, be that guy that gets open in space and can create some run after catch. So from an offensive coordinator perspective, it's so frustrating to watch them play and feel like, especially with Travis Etienne went down. I thought, now this is a great opportunity now for Shenault to really be that guy that gets some running back carries, gets to play in some wildcat, and gets to be that guy. But man, they just don't use him like that.
Yeah, I think the issue with Shenault, which has been more exposed this year, I didn't realize as a rookie he was mostly a slot guy.
Yeah.
This year, for some reason, they've really tried to have him. They've really tried to force this. You need to be an outside receiver in this offense, and that's clearly not who he is. When I look at the stats that we have, when we look at him versus man coverage compared to zone, this is not a receiver that's winning it versus man coverage. He's not separating in that. Yes, maybe he could do okay on some contested catches because he's so big and athletic. But at the end of the day, it's a rookie quarterback, and still, like, he's a receiver. You're supposed to be open. And that I can say all I want, like, oh, he's huge, just give him the contested catch. I'm sure if he makes it, he can break off a long run after the catch. But at the end of the day, he has to get open. he really struggles to get open against man coverage. He needs to be playing in the slot more. But also there is a flaw with Chenault, which I don't know if I was overlooking that too much over summer or if it just we didn't have enough data really. There were a lot of factors going on, but with Chenault, one thing I talked about was that the reason I liked him was that after the 2021 season, he was either going to be a top 10 dynasty receiver or outside the top 50 receivers in dynasty. And that's the type of profile I like where, yes, it's high risk, but it's also high reward. In this case, it looks like a miss. I do have some type of hope for next year when Lawrence is no longer a rookie. Hopefully he can be a full-time slot receiver and they can get other weapons in this offense because, I mean, Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault this is a hard to watch offense when that's the weaponry with a bad offensive line and Trevor Lawrence and it's just terrible offensive play calling and usage. I noted it in a Twitter thread I was working on tonight. Carlos Hyde ran more routes than James Robinson this past week. Why is Carlos Hyde getting the pass down work? That makes absolutely no sense. There's been a lot of boneheaded decisions, just like let's put Agnew in the slot and have Laviska out wide. But I do think with Shenault, the concern is that he's more one-dimensional than you ideally like in a receiver that you can help build an offense around. I think there's still hope if you put him in the big slot role and just let him feast against linebackers and some of these slot corners, but it's unfortunate. I thought there was potential before the season that he could win on the outside potentially. It looks like that's just not going to happen. Not this year, maybe future years, but I think the ceiling has definitely come down for him. And I'm not just totally out on him for next year and in Dynasty, but some of the luster has worn off now that we know more about him with more NFL data. We know he can't win against man. We know that Jacksonville clearly doesn't always think that he's an every snap receiver. So there are concerns there. And why, like, ultimately one of my biggest like misses for fantasy would be touting Shenault in the 7th, 8th, 9th round of drafts, where at that point you want to lock in a flex play. And that if you took Shenault, he's not a flex play. He's either on waivers or on your bench. So definitely a miss for this season.
With that being said, you talk about misses. And one of the things that I have become more aware of is the process. And I'll give you an example. I made a bunch of trades in the offseason for Cam Akers. I felt like what we saw last year, and I felt like people that I trust who were also very high end on him. I mean, you can't predict that he's going to tear his freaking Achilles 3 weeks before the season. But my point is that if you have a process, you go through it, a miss like Laviska, I mean, you just got to take it as it is and move on, right?
Yeah, I'll give you an example actually of a miss that I had preseason where I should have been better. Because I think the Visca one, I'll probably end up doing that again with this type of profile. The guy where I go, wow, he's young. And come end of 2021, he's either a top 10 dynasty receiver or he's outside the top 50. There's no in between. Looks like he's headed for the outside the top 50 scenario. An example of a miss where I probably should have seen it coming was, I mean, I'm the stack guy. I love stacking. I was obsessed with the Buccaneers offense. Tom Brady was the non-mobile quarterback I targeted in all my drafts. Obsessed with Brady. And I don't have much Evans or Godwin on my fantasy teams. Because I went, you know what? Antonio Brown and Gronk are just the most screaming value in drafts. You have to scoop them up, which ended up being true. Antonio Brown is the number 5 receiver per game in PPR this year. And you could get him in the 9th round. And he's the wide receiver 5 per game. Smash. Gronk. It's like the tight end 2 per game or something. If you throw out the game where he had back spasms after 2 snaps. Gronk, absolute smash for late round tight end. I crushed those picks. But then I look up and I go, wow, Evans and Godwin are top 12 in PPR, both top 12 in PPR points for this season. Yes, it took the Antonio Brown injury. However, even when Brown was healthy, they were both producing. And that's a case where if I liked the Buccaneers offense so much, and I talked openly about how we're better at team analysis than player analysis, then I inherently should have liked the starting receivers on the Buccaneers, Evans and Godwin, and that it doesn't matter as much that I think they're not necessarily good values or they're not going to get as many targets per game as Antonio Brown. What matters more is that this is an offense I like. I'm not as good. None of us are as good at predicting these micro player level takes as we are just saying, wow, holy crap, the Buccaneers have Brady, Fournette, AB, Gronk, Evans, Godwin, a great O-line. They're going to score a ton of points. And that's what we're better at. And I should have, even if I think Evans and Godwin are not as good values, maybe I'll take more Antonio Brown and more Gronk in my fantasy drafts. But I took very little Evans and Godwin. And that's something that I think is a real mistake of mine that I can learn from and say, you know what? That kind of violated. Yes, I got so caught up in how these guys were such better values, but I also got caught up in player level takes when at a certain point I have to say, you know what? I still want to be above the field when it comes to however many teams I draft. I want to have more Evans and Godwin than the average person if I like the Buccaneers that much. So I think that's a good one where I can learn from that take. Where's the Chenault experience? Yes, it was a miss, but I don't necessarily think chasing that profile is bad to do each year.
No, because I think you're definitely going to hit on some of those. Like I'm like you, I was a big Gronk guy too in the value. And you look at those two players, and look, you can't. When I do projections before the year starts, I don't assume injuries, and I'm not a big injury prone and believe the same guy's going to get hurt every year. I think some guys are just not as lucky as others, but I think the process is right. Like I was big on Gronk where you could get him. I was big on Antonio Brown as well because where you could get him in the draft and a huge upside and have a wide receiver too or a flex play during bye weeks or during a playoff run. Gronk's a guy right now that's going to help a ton of teams during the playoff run if he can stay on the field. So I feel like the process is right. But I love the fact that you say, yeah, the process is good. It makes sense because the value and the ROI you can get if those guys stay healthy for a full season. But I love the fact you're like, yeah, but Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are also good plays. And I could have gotten them, I would have taken them probably at their ADP or maybe a little bit higher, but I would have hit on that as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a ton of Fournette as well in my drafts.
Me too.
There's no running back actually that I have more of in my best ball drafts than Leonard Fournette. Like across the board, I have so much Fournette. It's because I like the Buccaneers offense. And it was kind of like Chenault where we saw Chenault as having this crazy range of outcomes where it's anything from what he's doing right now to like if he built on last year. He was averaging 11 fantasy points a game last year. He had 700 total yards in like 12 and a half games last year as a rookie. That's really good. Fournette was another guy. Crazy range of outcomes that I bought into heavily, just like Chenault, where I thought, you know what? Fournette is either going to be a league-winning type player or nothing. And I'm just going to go all in knowing that this upside is there and that Ronald Jones probably isn't – there's probably not the total bell cow upside case for Ronald Jones. But I know that is there for Fournette. We even saw it in the football playoffs last year. So I think that's kind of the idea of like hyper targeting the guys that you think have this crazy range of outcomes where ultimately you churn so much of your fantasy roster each year. I've dropped Chenault at this point in my leagues, but Leonard Fournette is winning me a lot of leagues based on where I got him because he was going at a similar range to a Chenault, sometimes even later. So I think those are the kind of decisions where I generally do want to lean on the high risk, high reward outcome because you want to get first or second place. And that sometimes the uncomfortable pick who has a terrible floor, like Fournette's floor was what Ronald Jones has been this year. Like Ronald Jones has been terrible. Fournette could have been that. Like I can't claim to say like I knew Fournette would be the total workhorse, but when that's in the guy's range of outcomes and we've seen it before, I have to factor that in.
Well, let's move on. And one of my favorite aspects, and I don't know why, I feel like Twitter and the fantasy community is pretty big. And with that comes a league like the Fishbowl. And I feel like you guys were the only league or the only site that really kind of got out and wanted to help Scott Fishbowl contestants. And your rankings, I'll tell you what, I'm 8-4 in the Scott Fishbowl. I'm not a redraft guy. I'm a dynasty guy, but I did nothing but go straight off of your rankings. I even sent you my team right afterwards. Said, hey, look, all I did is go straight off it. What do you think?
It was a good team.
Obviously, neither one of us knew Cam Akers was going to go out right away, but irrelevant to that, I'm 8-4, and that was a hell of a great tool. And I think you know your audience, and you went after it, and that was a great tool for us. So thank you for that.
I'm glad. I took Akers too. Took him in the 3rd round. I was like, oh my God, total bell cow. You get half a point for a first down. This guy's in an elite offense.
Yeah.
He's gonna smash. Took him in the 3rd round. I'm also 8-4, so no Akers. Been fighting that uphill battle. I have Antonio Brown and Gronk on my team, so they haven't had very many contributing weeks. But I think ultimately the strategy of trying to lock in some strong quarterback play and then going off of that and just trying to find like those micro edges in our rankings compared to what other people were likely drafting off of, I do think it led to success. I have Jamar Chase, someone I was very high on compared to consensus. So I think that ultimately our rankings probably helped people overall, even if some of them, like the two of us, took Cam Akers several weeks before he misses the season, which you can't see that coming.
No, you can't. A couple more things before we let you go, because it's a little longer than we usually go, but I want to hit you right. It's not often we actually get to talk to you. And one of the questions I want to know is that everyone talks about being ahead of the industry or being ahead of what people are doing to make themselves successful in the game. Do you see anything? Because analytics, I mean, it was all about film study. It was all about trying to find the great guy who looks like Tarzan but doesn't play like Jane. So with that being said, do you see things coming in the future that are going to change the game even more than what we've seen with them?
I think that the future is still just with data-driven approaches and using analytics. And I actually really like film. I think sometimes people think, oh, you're an analytics guy, you must hate the film community. No, I actually think it's really valuable. But I think that the strength of the film community is individual player analysis, and that it's not necessarily the most efficient way to spend your time purely for fantasy, but I think it's very helpful per player. And that I think I had an idea that I made a Twitter thread about this last year, and I was like, what if the film community kind of came together and all tried to put together different highlight clips and put these together for different players, and that if everyone kind of worked together harmoniously, that would kind of do what analytics is doing, where analytics is, I can take a data set of hundreds of players and very quickly figure out who I think's good, who I think's bad, and the probabilities of success. And I'm going to do fairly well with that. However, if I weave in what the film community is telling me about certain players, then I can make little small adjustments to my rankings and my process and improve upon it. So I still think that analytics is probably the future and the best way overall to innovate, just because it's a little bit faster. If you think about if you watch film, you actually have to watch the film. If you're watching, say that you watch Trevor Lawrence in college, you watch 300 pass attempts. That's going to take you quite a while, several hours at least, to watch 300 pass attempts and take some notes. I can just look at his college QBR, his college yards per attempt, what age he was with this production, and I can already start to generate some assumptions and have an idea of how good Trevor Lawrence likely is at the NFL level. So that's why I think that analytics is still kind of the future of the quick innovation, the quick innovation, but why I also think film is still really important, because a lot of these micro adjustments are through film. And the reason that I knew that Elijah Mitchell's speed was important was because of the film community and the people who look at the Shanahan scheme. If I had never talked to anyone in my life and watched a Niners game, the last thing I would think is, wow, look at this zone running scheme. That would have never crossed my mind. But because of the film community and the people that are grinding the tape and understanding how Shanahan runs his running back offense through how the running backs in that offense operate, I can then go, okay, I think the data point that links the successful running backs is 40 time. Elijah Mitchell looks like a better fit than Sermon. So that's why I think that generally the faster innovations seem to come with analytics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like gung-ho about we need no more film, purely analytics, because then I would have missed on Mitchell potentially. And I might have been too caught up in, well, Mitchell can't succeed. He's only 200 pounds. Trey Sermon's 220 pounds. Most successful NFL running backs are 220. And then I would have paid attention to the wrong data point potentially. But thanks to the film community, I paid attention to the correct data point and said, oh, you guys are all saying Shanahan wants these fast running backs for the zone scheme. Cool. Here's Elijah Mitchell. The stats say he's the better fit.
I don't know, Josh. I'll tell you this. It's people like me that come to people like you to try and be better at the game. So one of the things that really I like about you is that any tweet, anything that I've reached out to, you've never had a problem responding. And so I thank you for it. You're great for the community. And that Twitter community can be so combustible at times, as you know. There's been a few times where you and have engaged in people getting mad about this, that, or that. But I know for me, being a consumer of the game, being a consumer of the information, I appreciate the work that you do. And thank you for the opportunity that you give us people to kind of engage with us and help us along this path. So thank you so much. And can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. I don't want to act like I'm some like holy Twitter person that does everything right. I've engaged in my fair share of pettiness on Twitter throughout the past year and a half that I've been very active. But what I try and do is, just like with my work, I try and iterate and get better. And I get in pretty much no Twitter feuds now. I realize that that's a waste of time. It doesn't make anybody better. Right. Even if I feel so strongly this way versus another way, if the other person feels so strongly this way and that it seems like neither of us are willing to budge, we should probably just leave it at that because neither of us are going to budge. So that's something that I've tried to get better at. And then in terms of helping others, I think that's really important, is that it seems like with any industry where money's involved, people very often seem to trend towards like, I want the money for myself. And I actually think it's really interesting that I've kind of carved out this role for myself where I make enough money to live the middle-class lifestyle, and I do it through helping others. And that it's not like, oh, I'm making a living wage through profiting off of other people, and that I'm actually paid a good amount of money for my role to educate others. And I think that's kind of unique. And I think it's cool that it's possible in this industry to get paid to help others rather than feeling like the only way, because I know a lot of other people out there kind of reframe it as, if I want to make money in this industry, I have to make sure not to reveal anything. I can't let anyone learn what I know. So I beat them in fantasy. And like, of course I like to win in fantasy. It's not like I want to get 10th place in all my leagues, but I also think that I've seen real monetary value myself and have had a job via helping others. And I think that that's actually really important, and that we should try and promote this type of position more, because I know there's other people out there who want to help others. And I just think it's better overall. Like, people get addicted to gambling, all this type of stuff. Like, money makes people do crazy things. Yeah. So I think it's kind of cool that I'm in this unique position where my salary is tied up in making sure that player profiler is updated and that we're helping as many people as possible. So I try and take that seriously. And I think that's one of the lucky parts about my job, is that there's no financial incentives tied up in like making sure that I beat other people in fantasy for my job. And that, like, yes, of course I like to win, but if I'm not helping others win as well, I would get fired.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's kind of an interesting note, is that a lot of site contributors, they get paid so little from these websites, and they're like, I'm getting $100 a week to contribute. It's very tempting. Oh, I found this really cool thing about this player. I'm going to play him in DFS. I'm not going to tell anyone though. It's not worth me getting this $100 a week to reveal this. I want to profit myself. And I think that that's actually just bad for the industry as a whole. And that I don't even necessarily fault those people. They're probably just acting in their own best interest for what what's going on with them. But I think it's more so promoting the job that I have, and that you can also have this type of job and try your best to help others, because everyone loves fantasy football, but not everyone has 50 to 70 hours a week to put into it like I do. So I think I'm just kind of lucky in that sense.
Well, hey man, we appreciate you, brother. This has been a phenomenal show, man. Appreciate you coming on, especially last minute. Let's have dates.
When you were even supposed to be on.
Appreciate you, man.
It wasn't last minute. It was a week early minute.
No, it was good. I had the full day preparation. I got the show sheet on Tuesday, and I was like, this is the most prepared podcast. Usually I get it 2 days beforehand. What is going on?
Yeah.
And then this morning I was like,
just keep telling people
going
that.
on.
Yeah, right. Tell them we know what the hell we're doing.
Josh, just keep telling people. I'll be like, oh, this podcast, like 6 months in advance, they book you. They're going to fly you out to this private location. You're going to get intel months in advance. You're going to memorize the show sheet. It's perfect.
Yeah.
There you go, man.
Thank you so much, Josh. We appreciate it. And I look forward to, reaching out to you in the future.
Hey, go Bulldogs.
There we go. Go Bulldogs.
We can all agree.
Yeah. Brett, Bruce, thank you so much.
All right. See you guys all next week.